Facebook lifetime again. I am Dr. Sandeep Karunakaran, actually Colonel Sandeep Karunakaran. Prior to joining Oasis Fertility, where I'm currently working in Hyderabad, I used to work in the army and various capacities as a medical officer, then as a gynecologist, and then as a fertility specialist. And today it is my proud privilege to talk on a topic which is very close to my heart, and that happens to be fertility preservation. Uh, well, to start off, I'll be talking in as simple terms as possible because the entire idea is that this talk is directed towards our ultimate, the customers, or rather the people who need our help, our patients. We are truly blessed to be in this profession of medicine, and more blessed possibly to be in the field of reproductive medicine because we bring a lot of smiles to the families. But once in a while, we need to preserve fertility. Now, what do you understand by fertility preservation? Of course, I'll divide this topic into two parts, that is fertility and then secondly, preservation. Fertility is the potential to reproduce. Can this potential in a man or a woman be preserved for a longer duration of time? Well, man has always been trying to preserve things for a long time. Well, it began with preserving, let's say, mangoes in terms of pickles and jams, apples, nuts, fruits, making them into dry fruits, and juices, so that you can enjoy the taste of mangoes even in winters. In Egypt, people tried to even preserve dead bodies, and we see them today as mummies. But what is most important was all this was done at room temperature. Slowly, man discovered equipment which can preserve temperatures at a very low temperature, at a very low standard. And hence, preservation slowly became cryopreservation. That is preservation with the help of cryology. That is preservation with the help of cold. And slowly but surely, we have made tremendous progress in this field. Initially, well, we started freezing semen. That is where we actually started because semen was available in plenty and the sperms are in numbers of millions. From semen, we progressed into embryos, into oocytes, into ovarian cortex. I'll be talking about all these things in a little more detail. But as a very young boy, possibly in standard third or fourth, if I'm not wrong, my first interaction with fertility preservation came when I was in my village and we were trying to inseminate a cow. We were trying to get a better breed. And this guy, the veterinary doctor, he came along with a cryopreserved sample. And that was the first interaction with cryopreservation or fertility preservation that I had. Of course, a lot of things has changed. A lot of water has flown under the bridge since then. Well, to begin with, fertility preservation can be divided broadly into two parts. One is social freezing. A lot of people must have heard what social freezing is. Well, social freezing is some indication where there is no medical indication per se. It is generally when you want to delay your fertility potential for a non-medical reason. It could be a social reason. That is why it is called social freezing. A lady wants to pursue her academic career, her professional career, but she desires to keep her eggs young. Younger eggs have better potential to form better embryos. So you preserve your eggs at an early stage in life and use them when you are settled in a profession or in academics. A lot of people are doing this, and social freezing is coming in a very, very big way. Medical freezing is when you ought to freeze your gametes or embryos for a medical cause. Well, it can be anything. It could be a short-term freezing, like we do a semen freezing before any IVF procedure is started off with. Egg freezing can be in cases where you want to preserve the fertility of a lady who has been inflicted with malignancy or cancer. And there are many more indications as such where medical freezing is done. So we have two types of freezing: social freezing, where there is no medical indication, and medical freezing, where there is an indication as demanded by the medicine parlance per se. So let's talk of fertility preservation in a slightly different way. Let's divide the entire subset of the population that we interact with in terms of male and female. As far as the male is concerned, the mature male, I'll talk of the mature male first, a man who ejaculates or has the potential to produce sperms. The easiest thing to freeze is a semen. If a man ejaculates, it's easy. He takes out the sample by masturbation and we could easily freeze it. If a man for some reason cannot ejaculate, then we could induce ejaculation by means of various equipment, or else we could retrieve the sperms directly from the testis by surgical methods, and this sperms could also be frozen. When it comes to an immature male, a young boy who has not attained puberty, then the option remains of freezing seminiferous tubules. These are the production site of the sperms per se. Sadly, this part of fertility preservation is still under experimental head. So a lot of things have to be done in this field. When it comes to female, let's talk about the mature female, that is a lady who ovulates. Well, there are two options. One is if a lady is married. If she is married, you could get her oocytes or eggs out, inseminate it with her husband or a partner's semen, and make the embryos and freeze the embryos. Or else, one could just take out her oocytes or eggs and just freeze them as such. If it is an immature girl who has to undergo fertility preservation, then the focus shifts slightly. We here do something called as the ovarian cortex cryopreservation. The cortex is the outer layer of the ovary. This has to be dissected out either internally in the body or externally once we take out the ovary. And the cortex can be cut into small strips and preserved for a very long time. Another thing which is knocking on the doors of technology is something called as the whole ovary cryopreservation. We can here completely freeze the ovary and take it out and implant it at a later date. This unfortunately is still not optimized. When you come to talk of the duration of the cryopreservation, we can almost do this for an infinite period of time. But we divide this into three types. One is the short term, long term, and a very long term cryopreservation or fertility preservation. Short term is when a man has difficulty in ejaculation or possibly stressed out on the day of the IVF. We could bypass this eventuality by asking him to ejaculate and preserve his semen for just before the procedure per se, and use the preserved sperm for the IVF or whatever procedure that needs to be done, or an IUI cycle, whatever. It could be anything. Long term is somewhere where you actually have, like, let's say you stimulated a patient for IVF, you took out the eggs, but she goes into HSS, that is ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, wherein you can't transfer the embryos back. Then you do it for a slightly longer term. You preserve it for about 4 to 5 months till she's ready, and whatever be the medical condition, you could preserve it for a slightly elongated period of time. And there are times when we have done cases in 2013-14, the lady has pair embryos, she's conceived in 13-14, and now she's come back for the same embryos to have a second child. So these are slightly longer perspective of preserving the fertility. The third is very long term. These generally happen in cases of malignancy. A young girl who's been afflicted with, let's say, leukemia, you preserve her cortex, she wouldn't need the cortex for about 15-20 years. Similarly, a young girl who's been diagnosed as a cancer breast, she wouldn't need her oocytes for at least 10 odd years more. She has to survive the fight, win the battle of cancer first, and then decide on fertility options. So here we actually do it for a slightly longer period of time. Scientifically speaking, we have two types of freezing. One is called the slow freezing, and the second is called the fast freezing, or what we popularly call as vitrification. These are slightly technical things, but I won't go into detail. But both these methods of freezing actually end up in a common cryo tank. That's where we preserve. And we preserve all the gametes and the embryos in liquid nitrogen. And you will be surprised to know that liquid nitrogen is at minus 196 degrees centigrade. It is a very, very dangerous thing to handle. And you need a lot of experience to handle things at this temperature. The duration of which these tissues can be preserved is almost infinite. Well, vitrification and cryopreservation is possible in other fields of science, let's say in nuclear medicine or in nuclear technology. All the nuclear wastes are cryopreserved, stored in lead silos, and then buried deep in the ocean so that they don't leak. So this is just one of the divergence of vitrification technology, and this is what makes it more and more interesting. Fertility preservation has helped ladies or young women concentrate more on their academic activity, concentrate more on, let's say, her professional career, and then when the time is appropriate, you could actually plan for your family at that point of time. Well, these are social eventualities which the society has decided. There are a lot of companies like Facebook, Google, who encourage social freezing, especially when the girl is young, so that you could use better oocytes of your own self at a later date. All this helps in getting better smiles on the faces of our patients. Imagine a lady who has been afflicted with cancer. She fights the entire disease, comes out victorious, and then she knows that she cannot procreate. Fertility preservation is the answer for all this. Imagine a man who's undergone surgery for CA rectum. You remove the malignancy, and during surgery, you possibly injure one of the pelvic nerves. He cannot ejaculate. Well, we have ways and means to help these people. Earlier, it wasn't there. And now, even that man can father his own child, his own genetic child, to be very precise. So, fertility preservation has, from the earlier days of just semen preservation, which was mainly restricted to veterinary practice, has now come mainly in a very, very long way into human practice. We are almost mastered all the tissues of fertility preservation, of which have the potential of fertility. We could preserve all of them. India has actually made a big contribution to cryopreservation. In fact, the first child, which was IVF baby, which was born in the world, of course, we all know is Louis Brown. The second one is in India, Durga. And it is said that Dr. Mukhopadhyay actually used cryopreserved embryos to eventually give birth to Durga. So, we are one of the leaders as far as fertility preservation technology is concerned. And we should be very, very proud of this fact. Fertility preservation has a very long way and a glorious way ahead. And a lot of things can be expected in the near future. Well, I try to make it as concise as possible so that one doesn't get too bored or too bogged down by the technology and the nuances of the entire subject per se. I am open for questioning, and I would be more than happy to answer any of the questions that you could put across to me. Thank you. Well, I do see one of the questions coming up, and what time duration is the fertility or these tissues can be stored is the question. Well, the time period as of now is almost infinite. You can store these tissues, be it sperm, be it oocyte, be it embryos, for an infinite period of time. As long as the conditions of storage is perfect. The tank should be full. There should be no emptying of the cylinder. The liquid nitrogen should be topped up. We should check all these levels once in a while. and we have a protocol and SOP to do that. And once that is done, we could actually preserve it for an infinite period of time. Any more questions? Okay. Well, I got a question. What is the risk of from chemotherapy and radiation? Well, the problem is during chemotherapy and radiation, the effect on fertility is definitely varies on what type of chemotherapy you're taking, what type of radiation you're taking, and it is a varied effect from person to person. But yes, we know that despite whatever advances we have made in onco technology, it definitely does affect the quality of the gametes, be it sperms or the oocytes. Oocytes more because they are generally in a process of reproduction, in the process of dividing actually. I'll go on to the next question. How long can the eggs or the sperms be preserved? Till date, it is almost infinite. There is no upper limit for preservation. When should I freeze my eggs is one of the questions. In the Indian population, or let's say in the world population, after the age of 35, the oocytes tend to have more congenital anomalies in the babies. The babies which are born out of oocytes which are more than 35 years of age do tend to show more congenital problems or chromosomal problems. So ideally, I guess, it should be much before 35. And in Indian population, and most of the studies unfortunately are done in the Caucasian or the white population. In the Indian population, it is generally said that by around 33 at the most you should preserve your eggs. Is it true that the embryos can be preserved for years? Yes, of course. It is an absolute fact that the embryos can be preserved for infinite period of time as long as one preserves it properly. Is there a difference in quality and the impact difference in quality and or impact in the conceived babies? No, there isn't. The genetic material is the same. The implantation potential is the same. In fact, there are studies which say that the outcome in a cryopreserved cycle is much, much better. There's a question on what are the latest developments in fertility preservation. Fertility preservation is rapidly progressing. Latest, I guess, is automated vitrification and thawing, automated freezing and thawing. So it completely removes the human element from this process. Otherwise, it's a very difficult it requires precise timing to actually freeze these embryos and thaw them. Otherwise, it's a very skilled procedure, and with automated vitrification and thawing systems coming in, we look forward to actually standardize the entire thing and completely removing the human element from it. The next question is, does pre-implantation genetic screening require our genes to be sequenced? What are the samples of the DNA taken from us? If you're talking about PGT, that is pre-implantation genetic testing, we do it. Pre-implantation means we have to actually do it before the implantation takes place. So we can do it at different levels. One can actually take the polar body biopsy from the oocyte. We can do a cleavage biopsy, a blastomere biopsy from a cleavage stage. But the standard of care today, of course, is doing a trophectodome biopsy from a day 5 embryo or a blastocyst. What we do is we take around 4 to 5 cells, we amplify the DNA in these 4 to 5 cells, and then it is analyzed with the help of a sequencer. The latest is, of course, the next gen sequencing, or called as NGS, and this gives us the entire detail of the chromosome which are there. But if you're looking for a specific gene, then we have to make the mark. We have to make the probe and then do a specific genetic disorder if you're looking for, like, example, thalassemia or something of that sort. Is it very costly? It would cost a bit, in the sense of, it depends on which media you're using, what you want to preserve, and how long you want to preserve. Because every fertility clinic, you have, the running cost of filling up the liquid nitrogen is there. someone has to maintain the inventory of these live, of course, it's still live, these cryopreserved embryos, which itself is a very tedious task. So most of the cost is for the liquid nitrogen and to maintain these embryos at this horrendous temperature of minus 196. It requires a lot of technical skill to actually freeze and thaw these embryos, and that also makes it a bit costly. The next question is difference between gamete preservation and embryo preservation and duration of each. Per se, the entire preservation method is the same. The solutions are different. I'll not go into the medical or the embryological nuances of the entire thing. But both oocytes, sperms, and embryos today can be preserved for an infinite period of time. There is no upper limit to preservation. Until date, no studies have proven that the duration of preservation has caused any issues in the offspring. There's another question: what are the other? What apart from liquid nitrogen can be used? Of course, our mainstay of cryopreservation or fertility preservation is storing the tissues in liquid nitrogen. Most of our media are optimized for liquid nitrogen. So hence we use liquid nitrogen, but there are certain tissues like sperm per se can be stored at slightly higher temperatures. We could use carbon dioxide, liquid oxygen, but everything is optimized for liquid nitrogen. And if you want lower temperatures, then you could use liquid nitrogen slush. There's a question: if I want to freeze my eggs, how many can I freeze? The more the merrier, ma'am. It's as simple as that. You should at least freeze eggs for 3 IVFs. So I guess we generally believe in the factor of 6. So if we get about 6, we aim to make batches of 6 to 8 oocytes and then use it as and when the need arises. But if you want to know how many can I freeze, you can freeze as many as you want, and the bottom line happens to be more the merrier. So if you have more eggs, the chances that you will conceive becomes as higher and higher. I don't know. There's someone who's thanking me because one of her sister-in-law has conceived, and well, I think these are the questions which had come down to me, and I think if there aren't, I'll wait for about a couple of minutes more, and before that, and before I close, I think I'll put in a final word. Well, I think the world should be aware that such a technology exists. And I personally feel, this is of course my personal opinion, that every person should analyze himself or herself before getting into the system of marriage. And it is always prudent to take a corrective action as early as possible before it becomes too late. Otherwise, upfront we are not very, very keen on taking up technology a little too far, or when the age increases, the difficulty of the procedure increases. So I guess it's always prudent to, if not assess yourself early in marriage, at least get yourself checked early in marriage. Use the this technology which is available for fertility preservation. Make your embryos, keep them, and then go on to enjoying the bliss of marital living. Well, there's one more question which has just come. Is it true that embryos can be preserved for years? Well, of course, it is true, absolutely very true, that the embryos can be preserved as long as possible. There is, as putting it again and again, there is no upper limit to preservation. The only key element is that you should keep the temperature correct, keep your liquid nitrogen tanks absolutely brim full, and nothing goes wrong with them if you have done the procedure perfectly. Well, I look forward, we use these sessions to actually educate our population, and I hope this spreads, and spreads faster than the coronavirus. And I hope everyone talks about these things to their children, also, I mean, why not? Amongst friends, among children, I mean, we should educate our entire generation, the next generation too, that these things do exist in today's world, and we should pass on this technology and the benefits of this technology to as many people as possible. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for a patient hearing, and thank you for the interaction. It's been an absolute pleasure to interact with all of you on this platform. Thank you very much. Have a great day.